welcome back to the Down to the Wire podcast. It's been a little while. I think it's been about a month, actually. Feels like a very, very long time since Jack and I were here talking to you about the latest and greatest in sport. Jack, how you doing?
I'm pretty good. I mean, fantasy sports are in full flow. I've aced my Premier League one. I'm just outside the top 5k. My NFL fantasy, I've won my week 1 matchup. Ronaldo's back at Man United. And Formula One's in full swing after a triple header. I mean, life doesn't get much better than this.
Well, and most importantly, Jordan Henderson scored an absolute screamer for Liverpool last night. No, yeah, I was thinking this earlier, actually. You know, you said about Ronaldo. The last time we did the podcast, I think Messi was probably still a Barcelona player. I think.
Lukaku would have still been an Inter player.
Yes, because I remember our last podcast, we made predictions about where teams were going to finish, and we said, I think that was it.
We
were
talking comments of Kane being at Man City.
Yes, we said if Kane signs for City, they'll win the title, and he didn't. So here we are. How quickly things can change in a month. Anyway, today we're talking F1 because we've had our little break. F1's had its little break, and they were back with a triple header after their little break. We're kind of going to do a coverage of all of them, really, because Spa wasn't really a race.
It was a non-starter.
Technically, hey, very good, very good. It was technically a race, but really it wasn't a race. Then we had Zandvoort, and last weekend we had... Monza, sorry. Thank you for that. I was on a bit of a blank.
I mean, it was on the notes.
It was on the notes, but I didn't actually have it open, so I was doing that off the top of my head. There we are. Right, should we just dive in?
Let's do it.
Right. Spa was 2 laps. Next race.
Yeah, I mean, the reason we didn't do a podcast after it was purely because it was like there's nothing to say. It had just been, it rained.
Yeah. So originally our plan was we weren't planning to do anything after we did the pre-season, the Premier League season preview. Then there was Spa, and it was wet. Then there was Zandvoort, and we didn't really manage to find the time, and now we're here. So, yeah, that's where we're at. But yeah, Spa was a little bit of a damp squib. Not a lot happened because it was it 2 laps? Literally 2 laps or 3 laps?
No, they had to do 3 behind the safety car. I think they ended up doing something like 6.
But it was literally the minimum amount required for it to be classed as a race and for them to award points, half points. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's some changes after that because I think, and a lot of the drivers pointed it out actually, like a lot of the fans had been.
That was a long day for fans.
Yeah, and it was pretty miserable to be fair. So they just kind of waited around to see cars go around very slowly, a handful of times, and then that was it.
To be honest, if it wasn't Spa, I think they might have put that race on. But there was so much talk about Eau Rouge after Lando's crash and the fact that so many people, there's such because cars are so quick. It's like before you could get away with it. Now they're just so quick that up Eau Rouge you can't really be going in that sort of conditions. I think, like, let's say that was Monza, I think they might have done it, but around Spa, just a touch too dangerous.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I don't know why they went ahead with it in light of the weather if they were never planning to race, and it seemed like I can understand why they waited to a certain extent. But it was almost like they just waited. Oh, we've got to do something. Did 6 laps, and they were like, oh, yeah, that'll do. Which...
Well, you can see they put their thinking caps on and said, it'll cost us a lot of money if we don't get this done today.
Yes.
Just get them around there for a few, and then we can get out of here.
But... Yeah, job's a good one. I mean, I think Fernando Alonso made a good point. He said, how can you call it a race if you're not allowed to overtake? And I think that's a pretty valid point, to be honest. Can't really argue with that.
So firstly, would you have rather they cancelled the race? Let's say the option of postponing wasn't an option because Formula One takes quite a lot of logistics to organise. Would you have preferred them to have cancelled that than to award any points? Because in a sense, I know there was no race, but then you decredit the qualifying in a sense. I mean, particularly with guys like George Russell, it was all for nout. So would you have preferred it to be cancelled, or would you want to see something like a 10% point awardage? Are you happy with 50%? Where do you lie?
I don't necessarily have an issue with points being awarded. I think my issue is that they could have rescheduled. I think I know I get what you're saying about logistically. But, it's not like they've got to do it. They have to do it the next day. They could tag it on at the end of the season. Possibly. I don't know. You're not telling me that they didn't have any other option.
What would happen with qualifying then, though? Would you want the qualifying carried over? A fresh qualifying?
No, I would say just do a fresh qualifying. I know that's brutal in terms of for George Russell, but
it's brutal for everyone. You think about a guy like Verstappen. It's such a long circuit. You got to nail it, and it's like, I think there's a lot of you could be aggrieved both ways. I feel like because obviously this is probably one of the worst outcomes because you've basically just not bothered. You've gone we're just.
Well, it's the bare minimum, isn't it? It's literally the bare minimum in order for points to be awarded and for it to be classed as a race.
But I don't think as a competition side of things, though, equally you could say it was. I wouldn't say the fairest because obviously doing it for another time, but fair in the way of you're not. It's always a kick in the teeth if you take something away from somebody. I don't think F1 ever tries to take something away. So by putting it on a different day and saying that the qualifying, like it doesn't make sense to carry qualifying over to if it's on a different occasion, but also to not give them anything for it. It's kind of like well.
So I get what you mean. I mean, I suppose I think the issue is more from the fans' perspective. Rather than the points being awarded and whether it's a race, etc. As in, like, the fans have paid very good money to go and watch a race, and they've watched less than 10 laps of cars driving around behind other cars very slowly. And
I imagine they probably got refunds or some because there was a lot of talk
I'm sure they did.
Afterwards. Yeah.
I'm sure they did, but still, as in that's not. I think. Yeah, I don't know. I'm a little bit jury's out. I mean, it's a bit of a.
You'd have liked them to do it a different day.
Ideally, I think. I mean, I don't know what the logistics are, but I feel like. Basically, my thoughts are that they waited so long. You were looking at it and going, "This is never going to dry up," and then they just waited, and then they did like 6 laps, and They may not have meant for it to be like that, but it feels like they've literally done the bare minimum, like you said, just kind of go, right, that's done, on to the next one. So, yeah, I can understand both sides, though. I don't think there's a right or wrong. I think it's a bit of a lose-lose either way, ultimately.
Fair.
Good result for Russell, though.
Oh, well, yeah, he wasn't going to finish second, had they not put that race on that day. So, yeah. Phenomenal for Williams. Although I gotta say, I reckon, as much as he's really glad he's got a second in the Williams, I bet it doesn't really feel like a podium for him.
Oh no, it's probably a bit of a feels like a little bit
anticlimactic.
Yes, definitely. 100%.
Yeah.
And that was Spa pretty much. There's not a lot else to say about Spa. It was wet.
So that one was bad for the fans. Then we went to race 2 in Zandvoort, and that was probably the most electric I've ever seen a race in my life. It looked insane.
Yeah, it was bonkers. And I got to say, Zandvoort is a cracking circuit. Obviously, we were meant to have Zandvoort for the first time last season because of COVID. It didn't happen. So this is our first race at Zandvoort. Got a few funky. Obviously, Zandvoort. It's had some updates, but Zandvoort is a fairly old circuit. But it's I think I'm right in saying it's new to the F1 calendar, isn't it? I don't think we've ever had it before.
No, I think they have. I think they have. Because I think when they were going round, they were showing the previous race winners.
Oh, yes,
and you were looking at guys like Senna and guys like that, and you're like, this is really, really old.
Yes. Yeah. Vintage Formula 1. But yeah,
But
interesting circuit. Nice turns. Some interesting.
Yeah,
corners.
that's the thing. They modernised it, but they not modernised in the way where they made it really boring, like all the Tilka tracks, but rather they adapted it to make it more entertaining. Because I think everyone knew you weren't going to be able to fit two Formula One cars around the whole circuit, so they went,
No.
let's make this banked turn where you can have something like 5 different driving lines, which all are pretty much as
Yeah.
good as each other, or good overtaking opportunities, and it was. I mean, lap 1 was just insane. It was just
Yeah.
cars all over the place, and it was just like, oh, it was like go-karting. It was incredible.
Yeah, I mean, it was that first bank turn, I think, is the one that's the most interesting, because you've got, as you said, you know, there are multiple driving lines that you could take, and I think that first bank turn, you've got the quickest line, which is basically right on the top of the bank, I guess, if that you want to call it, like the very outside of the track. That's the quickest line. But if you're a car following, the shortest line is the inside line. So if you can kind of make that stick, but it makes some very interesting in qualifying and interesting in the race, because you had drivers kind of testing things out and putting their cars in.
Well, usually on
areas.
turns, the fastest line is the inside. So
Yeah.
to find the fastest line to the outside instantly made it like that's probably the coolest thing a circuit can bring to Formula One, just because it's like, what on earth are you meant to do? It's like it's a complete flip of the script. Like, not only before where the inside is the fastest, it's also the easiest to protect, because if somebody wants to get past, they've got to go the long way around. Whilst you say the quickest is the long way around, it's going to make it. You know what I mean? It was just chaos, but it was good chaos. Not,
I mean, the circuit itself was brilliant. I mean, I don't know whether it'll benefit next season a bit more for the cars being a bit smaller.
100%.
Because it is still quite a narrow circuit.
Oh yeah.
But as in, I don't think that's. I think that's just that the cars are so big. They're just absolutely enormous.
I was thinking that last night, because I don't know if you've watched that new Schumacher film on Netflix.
I haven't yet, no.
But they were driving around and I thought, this looks epic. They're just all weaving left, right, left, right. Well, not weaving, but in a sense going, okay, now I'm going to go this side to try and overtake. Now I'm going to go this side to try. And it's just because the cars were smaller. And it's
and
like,
they're darty. They kind of... Sorry, go on.
I don't think when they came out with the regulations for the cars we currently have, they thought quite so much. I think they thought, big cars, there's more to work with. You're going to see the peak of Formula One.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone ever thought to the fact, hang on, the tracks are only so wide. Or at least the driving line's only so wide. That you can't really get away with that. So I think going back to the smaller cars is smart.
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is as well, like when you look at how the aero works, is, and I don't think they perhaps considered that the impact of moving off the driving line would be so severe that you're better off just kind of sitting behind the car lap after lap. Excuse me. But yeah, I feel like Zandvoort would be one of those ones that almost certainly benefits from having a slightly narrower, shorter car. Perhaps a bit more nimble, especially through those twisty sections.
Well, that's the thing after that bank turn where you have that sort of... It's almost like Suzuka. Suzuka's got the relatively sharp left, right, left, right, left, right, where you can only have one car. But Zandvoort was like, nah, we'll do subtle left, right quite quickly. And it was just like... I mean, if you watch, I think it was Giovinazzi and Ocon, both of them were the big losers in that twisty section, because both of them found themselves on the outside of either a 2 or a 3 at some stages. And it was just like, where the track went back in, there was no room for Giovinazzi. Then it was down to like Ocon and Leclerc into the next one, and there was no room for Ocon, so he dropped. So it was just like, it was almost like, imagine Star Wars or something. You got a fleet of ships all going towards them and all getting pinged off one at a time next to you, because it's like there's no room on the track for them anymore. But yeah, when they come out with the smaller car, I think it'll be some terrific races around there.
Yeah, hopefully it's not the same as previous where they say, oh, it'll be the most overtaken we've ever seen, and it just isn't. But speaking about the race specifically then, as you said, lap one was pretty epic, especially watching out of that bank turn. Like you said, there was cars everywhere. You're like, oh my goodness, what's going on? And I don't know how there wasn't some sort of accident, in all honesty, especially on that first bank turn, just because it's so. I'm trying to think of the word. It's so like out there in terms of a corner. It's quite unique.
And what was interesting was, despite qualifying and practice, everyone realising the outside was the quickest. Everyone went defend the inside like their lives, and then I think it was only Alonso who almost actually made contact with Ocon.
He just chucked it around the outside, didn't he?
I'll go around the outside then, and I think he took like 4 people. It was like, can't blame the guy. it was very logical. But yeah, he was the only person who really did something different. But
in terms of the race. Yeah, I mean, it was pretty much a stroll, I think, wasn't it? Yeah, Formula One puns. For Verstappen mainly, it never really. Well, I say never. It was never in doubt, but Hamilton kind of kept him honest, I would say.
Yeah, pitted early to try and get the undercut. Yes. Then they used Bottas as a blocker. Which, to be fair, did bring about a 4-second gap down to less than a second when he let Hamilton
and then Hamilton's tyres just went off, didn't they, at the end? So he was kind of just doing his own thing. Didn't
they pit him onto the hards and Verstappen pitted onto the mediums? Or was that Monza where that happened? No, it was definitely Zandvoort. I'm pretty sure Hamilton got pitted onto a set of tyres which he just probably didn't need, whilst
possibly
Verstappen just looked fine. Oh no, it might be the other way around. I think Verstappen was on the hards, Hamilton was on the mediums, and the mediums were never going to do it. And I think they're pointing that out throughout the race, the commentary team. But I think they tried the medium to see if they could get so much speed that they could overtake Verstappen and hold him behind, hopefully. But Verstappen, I think with the Dutch crowd there, I mean, it was a rave pretty much for most of the race.
Yeah, it was. But,
the flares going off, proper good.
I feel like that race kind of summarised how Mercedes have been for a big chunk of this season, to be honest. In terms of, I feel like they have to perform. Well, Hamilton has to perform at his absolute maximum in the car, and tactically they have to try and pull out all of the stops, just to be close. And even then, you could argue that at the end of the race, it wasn't really that close. Well, no, it wasn't, because Hamilton had to pit again to go onto the soft tyres. So
that was nervy. But he didn't do that because he needed new tyres. He did it because Bottas almost stole fastest lap. Yeah. Bottas goes on to them. To be honest, I couldn't understand that from Mercedes. He said it was precautionary, and to be fair, he did have like a 40-second gap on. I think it was Gasly. But it was like, you put him onto the softest, what did you expect he was going to do? Yeah. And he set 2 purples, and even though the third sector was a yellow, he was like, it still was a distance quicker.
It was when he was going round, and I think it was Croft. He said, is he going to do a fast lap? And then Jenson Button was in commentary. He was like, oh no, he's just in a purple sector 1. It's like, this could get messy.
I think it was his pit guy James came up. Valtteri abort the lap. The lap. It's like you're going too quick.
Yeah,
it was like still got it regardless.
Yeah, because they said, didn't they? They said. So I think as he was coming in, they said, okay, Valtteri, we're not going for fastest lap. This is just precautionary. So that was like his race engineer. And then the more senior person came on mid-lap and they were like, okay, Valtteri, we're not going for fastest lap. Abort, please. Abort.
I think it was feel Bottas as well and just went, why not? I can. Stop
and he did purple it, but apparently he very much pulled out in the final sector. So he was still the fastest by a distance at that point. And then Hamilton went around and just rinsed it again, having pitted. But yeah, that not a massive amount to say about Zandvoort, really. In all honesty, it was.
I think Sergio Perez and Alonso, I think, were the only 2 people who really found alternative driving lines to get past people. I mean, Perez was overtaking everybody pretty much.
He was. I feel like I think I'm right in saying that somewhere he said though that like he was pretty much on the limit. As in, every overtake he said he did was very risky, and it was just to try and get as many points as he could, because I'm already saying he didn't qualify particularly well, did he? I can't remember now.
No, but I'm pretty sure he had to pit almost immediately because he did something to his tyres.
Yeah, it was something like that.
And then he was instantly onto a set of hards, and which was disappointing because I think when Sainz pitted, he was behind him, and I think they were like 8/9 at that point. But bearing in mind at that point, Perez had already pitted once. So it's kind of just like one of those, what could have been had I can't remember what the incident was though. It was either lap 1 or lap 2, but he had an issue where he had to pit almost immediately.
Yeah.
It might have even been his front wing, but I can't remember.
But he basically he was fighting through the field for the whole race.
And fighting well.
Yes, very well. I think that's it for Zandvoort, is it?
Yeah, let's move on to
So in
Monza.
summary, like the circuit, not a massive amount of overtaking. Hopefully it'll be better with smaller cars next season.
Yeah.
On to the next one. Monza. Right, this is where we're going to have a bit more to talk about. I mean, firstly, we had the second sprint race, sprint qualifying, because it's not a race, is it? According to some donkey in the FIA, like it's clearly a race. So, well, I say first we had the sprint race. First we had qualifying for the sprint race, which was, interesting. So Bottas, Bottas got pole for the sprint race, having taken a load of penalties for new parts, followed by Hamilton, followed by Verstappen. I think I'm right in saying that Verstappen was a lot closer than would have been expected.
I think he had a double toe off Gasly and Perez to get there.
He did.
I think everyone had a double toe from somebody, because if you're behind Verstappen, you're going to have a triple toe, quadruple toe, so on and so forth.
But yeah, I mean, I guess we had the usual shenanigans at Monza with people trying to...
people almost got taken out in the pit lanes.
Yeah, it was the Aston Martins, wasn't it? Like, both of them came out at the same time. It's like, what on earth are you doing?
Yeah, not smart.
But it's funny, I don't understand. Like, this is the third year in a row now where I would say it's been a big problem. Because the year that we went to watch, I think, was the first year that I'd really noticed it. Because that was the year where they all kind of, like, were trying to get the toe. That was the year that Hulkenberg went straight on at the chicane.
Just to lock up and be at the back.
Yes. And then they kind of got, like, 2/3 of the way around the lap, and they were like, sugar, we're not going to get around quick enough to start our fast lap. So they all just like,
the thing
bombed
is,
it.
I think the fast guys all realised that by the first turn. They said, we've got to actually get there. And I think it was guys like Leclerc trying to push their way through, but they were getting blocked. Because there were just so many of them in front of them. So it's just like, it was never going to work. I don't know what they changed in the rules to stop that, but basically it just became a race out of the pits instead.
I think they changed the minimum lap time. Sorry, the maximum lap time. As in the maximum amount of time you can take to do a lap without being penalised. But still, like, it's the same every year, because it's just quite similar to what happened at Azerbaijan, really, to be honest. As in, like, you saw, Leclerc get up into the top 3, where realistically, if he doesn't have the toe, he's probably not even in the top 5. So, and I don't really know how you can resolve that, because it's so powerful. As in, well, just look at Verstappen. I think Verstappen, when they were looking at all of the times, Verstappen's time was probably worthy of about 6th. And then because he had the double toe, he ended up 3rd. Well, that's huge. As in, that's a significant jump. So, when you're going to have that sort of impact, I guess you're going to have people queuing up and being a bit cutthroat in the pits.
Yeah. Well, it's the thing is, you can't blame teams for doing it.
No, of course not. They're all trying to gain advantage.
Yeah, you don't purposely hinder yourself, because there's no point. So
yeah,
really,
you don't get points
to find a way to
exactly. Yeah, you don't get points for being polite in Formula One, unfortunately.
No.
But yeah, they need to have some sort of regular. I don't know how they would do it, but they need to do something, I think. So yeah, that was qualifying. Then we move on to the sprint race. And I guess the biggest talking point would be that Hamilton dropped down like a stone. Had an absolutely shocking start off the line. And I think, like, when you watch it back, it was in that kind of second phase. He kind of bogged down. And then in that kind of second phase of the start, like, he was just swamped. I think he had Gasly one side, he had Leclerc the other. And he just couldn't...
He was very lucky Gasly didn't overtake him as well.
Yeah. He was
I can't remember what happened. I think, he lost his front wing from somebody.
I think he took damage, didn't he? So somebody...
Yeah.
He was alongside
Oh,
Hamilton.
it was Norris. I think he
Yes,
hit the
that
back
was
of
it.
Norris's car.
And then
then
his
through the
wing-
It was pretty innocuous, but it knocked it down one. I think he hit it one side, which caused the other side to
And
drop
then it
to the
fell
floor.
into the
And
wheels.
it just went under him, and he went spearing off straight at the turn.
Yeah. So after the sprint race, we had Bottas on pole, but then he had to take all of his penalties, which dropped him to last. So basically, you had Verstappen on pole, followed by Ricciardo and Norris, followed by Hamilton. Before we move on... No, I said Verstappen, didn't I?
Oh, did you? Oh, I thought you just went Bottas to Ricciardo.
No. So Verstappen, Ricciardo, Norris, Hamilton. Before we move on to the race itself, now that we had the first sprint qualifying at Silverstone, so I guess there was a bit of novelty there. We've now had the second one at Monza. What are your thoughts now that we've had it? The novelty is worn off a little bit. What are your thoughts?
The outcome of this sprint race was a good one, but I think, I can't remember who, but somebody put on Twitter that a sprint race is the equivalent of football trying to introduce a 20-minute game, hoping for a 5-4 result. People aren't going to change the way they race or play football if it was a 20-minute game, just to appease the rule makers. That a race finds its ebbs and flows naturally. You can't force them by decreasing the period of time, especially in a sprint race where it's not really worthwhile taking risks, because it basically is just a glorified qualifying. But yeah, I still don't think I'm in favour of them. I like the idea of including something which means that you can get more variation in starting positions and results, but by and large I don't think it added anything.
No, after Silverstone I was a little bit jury's out. Now I've come to the conclusion that in terms of using it as a tool for qualifying, I don't like it. I think it's a bit gimmicky. I kind of agree with what you said in that it led to, you had the two McLarens on the front row, which had you not had the sprint race, you wouldn't have had them as high up. Equally, had you not had the sprint race, you would have had Hamilton dropping down the grid on race day, which I think would have also made for a bit of drama.
It would have, but in a sense we did get 20 laps of what that was, and he couldn't overtake, so we just had 30 more laps of it, and unless Hamilton tried an early pit or something, all that really would have happened was meant that if there wasn't a sprint race, Bottas would have been at the back, Verstappen would have won it by a landslide probably, and Danny Rick and Norris would have finished third and fourth.
But you say we saw Hamilton just stuck behind the McLarens, and that's true, but because of the length of the sprint race, there's no strategic advantage to pit in, because you're never going to make it back up. Whereas in a race where you've got an extra 50 odd laps, for example, Mercedes could have gone, right, plan B, we go really fast on the tyres that we're on now, pit early, and then go for the hards at the end of the race. So you do like a short first stint and a long second stint.
Well, I think Mercedes tried. No, it was the McLarens that tried that. One of the reasons they got ahead was that they started on the soft in the sprint race, whilst everyone else started the medium. So
exactly.
You did still get those variation, but
what I mean
just wasn't powerful enough.
Yes, and I guess what I'm saying is I agree with you in that if you look at what happened in the sprint race, there's an argument to be said that in the actual race, how do you know that it would have turned out any different? Well, you don't know, but as in at least you would have had the potential variation of pit strategy, whereas in a sprint race it's just not worth the time because it's so short, you're never going to make that time back up. But I think that's a minor point really, as in I think, I don't know, I still feel that the sprint race is a bit gimmicky, and I think because it's only for qualifying, as you said, like for a lot of drivers, unless you have a stinker in the the qualifying for the sprint race, if that makes sense, unless you're at the top or you're right at the back, the sprint race just isn't worth the risk. You're better off just holding position. Do you get what I mean? So yeah,
all we've seen from two sprint races is the first one, Perez had an incident which put him at the back, and in the second one, Gasly had an incident which put him at the back.
Yeah.
Apart from that, it's like in a sense, you could have 10 sprint races. All that'll happen is you'll keep having one person drop to the back or something like that.
And
it doesn't create more racing. It just means that someone's going to be the unlucky guy that falls to the back every time.
Yeah, someone gets involved in an incident. I think like in Silverstone, Alonso just went on an absolute charge. And I'm sure somebody went on an absolute charge in Monza, but I can't remember who it was. But yeah, as in you're talking like 2 drivers of 20 odd. And as in, is it really worth... I don't know, I can't help but feel that it makes the initial qualifying just pointless. It just makes it irrelevant. It does just make it irrelevant. Because you're qualifying to get an order for the qualifying for the race. Equally, it does mean you have qualifying on Friday, sprint race Saturday, race Sunday, which is quite nice, to be fair. I'm not going to lie, it was pretty cool coming home from work on the Friday to have a bit of Formula 1 on the TV.
It is a success in that what the Formula 1 aimed was to make the weekend more entertaining in a sense, because at present it is a Friday practice which nobody really cares about, Saturday qualifying, Sunday race. Now you've got something on every day, so it makes that sort of all weekend ticket that little bit more valuable. But
well then, is there an argument? Is it an argument that they should use the sprint race as its own separate event rather than just as a tool for qualifying? You know, like they do in the F2, where they have a sprint race and then they have a feature race, which is their normal race, if that makes sense.
I don't think I enjoyed the sprint race enough to want a sprint race instead of a normal race.
No, not instead of, as an addition to. So in the F2, I'm pretty sure they do qualifying, sprint race, and then feature race.
But what are you gaining from a sprint race?
So you award points, but it's just a different type of race to the feature race. So for example, if you have a sprint race rather than qualifying, you award a certain amount of points, treat it like a normal race, but just over a shorter distance. And then you kind of remove the variant, and it doesn't impact, I can't remember now, but I don't think it impacts where you start on the Sunday. So it's like its own individual event.
Yeah, I don't see how it's much different unless you're awarding more points. We'd still get the same result, I think.
Well, I mean...
Or are you saying people hold off because they don't want to take damage?
I would think so. I would think that... I think the more points is a factor. For example, if you use Monza as a template, right? Red Bull may go, right, well... And this is, I'm not saying there's any sort of logic behind this, but Team A, for example, may go, right, I think over the course of a full race, we can't challenge Team B, but over the course of a feature race, we can. So tactically, we're going to do this for the feature race and this for the sorry.
Why could they, though?
Well, because it's just a different length.
What makes them more racy?
For example, they may not be quite as good in terms of maintaining tyres. So when the race is shorter, they can go on the faster tyre for a short amount of time, and they can be quicker than they could be in the feature. It's a different type of race. I'm not saying that it would work. I just, I think I would be more in favour of having a feature race in its own individual right than having... Sorry. I'd be in favour of having a sprint race in its own individual right rather than having sprint qualifying for a race. If that makes sense.
I disagree. I don't see there's enough merit of a sprint race for it to stick around, even as its own thing. And I don't think awarding more points will change much. Like, in a sense, Formula 1 cars are so finely tuned. All that would have really happened was, assuming Bottas didn't have all the grid penalties, he would have just got even more points on the weekend. Nothing else would have changed. Like, in a sense, he's just doubling down. You may as well just bring back double point weekends, in a sense, for these one-off occasions, because that's the only result you're going to get from a sprint race, is the same as a normal race, bar one or two small positional changes. I
don't know what they do in terms of points for the sprint race. I don't know whether they award... I don't think they award the full complement of points. But yeah, and I'm not saying that I am hugely in favour of it, but I think I would be open to the idea of that more than I am to sprint qualifying, because at least for me, in my head, it has more of a purpose, whereas I feel like the sprint qualifying is F1's attempt to extend the weekends. You have more of the
I'll agree
important
with you
stuff.
there. But I don't like the idea of a sprint race end of. Like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
As I don't like.
I know.
it.
I'd agree with you there.
I prefer to strip it out and say it's not part of qualifying. But
I would
equally,
prefer.
I don't really want it as
If
an
you
event
ask me,
type.
if you ask me what I want qualifying followed by a race. That's what I want.
Yeah.
That's where I'm at.
Some would say the current format works pretty well.
Yeah, and well, the thing is, this is the thing. Is in like part of their thing is to attract new fans. Like, if I was sat with somebody who'd not watched Formula One before and I'd showed them that sprint qualifying for Monza, they'd be like, "Well, I'm not watching any more of that because it was so boring. Nothing happened. It was Anyway, I feel like we could get caught up talking about just sprint qualifying for blooming ages. Should we talk about the race, the actual race, the good bit? So
Which
I mean,
was
the first
quite a good race, to be fair.
it was. Do you know what? After the sprint qualifying, I wasn't holding out much hope, but the race itself, I thought. Now this might be a bit controversial. I thought it was the best race of the season so far.
If you'd have put that in the notes, I would have thought what race was better. And I'm just going from my head of the previous races.
Oh well, I'll carry on talking for a moment, and you try and have a think of what race you would argue was better.
Okay.
So, yeah, after the sprint qualifying, you had, obviously, as we said on the front row, you had Verstappen, followed by Danny Ric, followed by Lando Norris. It was quite interesting off the start. I don't know, I feel like because Danny Ric was so hungry, you always had that little feeling that he was going to try something off the start. And he did. He managed to beat Verstappen into turn one. To be fair, I think McLaren's just had a brilliant weekend. They controlled. Daniel Ricciardo controlled the race very well. As in, he wasn't necessarily just driving off from Verstappen. Verstappen wasn't gaining on him at any point really. That was entertaining to see. It was nice to see Danny Ric. It was nice to see McLaren actually just competing for a race win. It's been a long, long time.
I do think that probably wraps up third place for them.
In the constructors? Yeah.
Yeah. There's so many points they'll have got from that there's no way Ferrari...
Yeah, I don't think... and the thing is, I know McLaren have been a little bit up and down in terms of form, but
Danny Ric's
Ferrari...
coming good.
Yeah, Danny Ric is coming good. That's a good point, actually. Is in, like, when you look at... You know, we said, I think it was at Monaco, we were kind of questioning, like, look, are we going to see Daniel Ricciardo... are we going to see the best Daniel Ricciardo? And we were kind of not sure. Oh, I wasn't sure. I think I'm right in saying that you weren't sure either. But these past couple of races, he's been brilliant, and I think it's quite telling. And this is no respect to Lando Norris, obviously, because he's been brilliant as well. But Lando Norris has been in and around top three a handful of times, and McLaren's first win is with Daniel Ricciardo, not with Lando Norris.
I feel like that was chance more than anything. Like, in a sense, the reason Danny Ric won... Well, he won on his own right, but by and large, had there not been a sprint qualifying...
Yes, I do agree.
It would have been either a Mercedes... Like, he needed Bottas off the grid penalties, he needed a Hamilton-Verstappen crash. Really, but, he was ahead at that point, but in a sense, had there not been the sprint qualifying, in a sense, it would have just been Verstappen anyway.
That's true, that's true.
So, I think that's the same for all race winners that haven't been Hamilton or Verstappen. They've
Something's happened.
Something's happened to at least one or both of them. Well, it's usually just one, but
I agree with you on that. I do think though, I agree with you in terms of the sprint qualifying, as in if you have Hamilton at the front from the start of the race, I think there's an argument that he might well have just driven off. But in terms of the race itself, I think even if Verstappen and Hamilton hadn't have become well acquainted, I think Ricciardo would have won anyway. I really do. Hamilton wasn't. He was struggling to get past Norris. he did eventually after. I think it was around the pit stop time. He did eventually, but as in he was stuck behind him for a long time. And I would say that Ricciardo was probably lapping a bit faster than Norris had been throughout the race. So, because I think there was that period towards the end, wasn't there, where they kind of said to Ricciardo and Norris, they said, right, all out to the end now, don't need to preserve tyres. And Ricciardo just kind of went a little bit. He managed to pull out like a 2-second gap. Yeah, so he was kind of gone. But yeah, sorry, you were going to say something, I kind of interrupted.
Can't 100% remember what it was, but it was to do with Verstappen.
Okay.
I can't remember what it was, so ignore me.
What was it? Was it in relation to Danny Ricciardo?
Probably
was. It when he was following Danny Rick, possibly?
Can't remember. Oh, I remember now. Verstappen may have won, but I think Red Bull, not outsmarted, but they thought back to Bahrain, and they thought, we went early last time and messed it up. So I think they are scared to make the jump on occasion. I think if Verstappen was to win that race with Ricciardo where he was, I think he needed to pit first. So before Ricciardo first, because when Ricciardo did it first, Verstappen was like, well, that's that, because these tyres are gone and I can't get anything more out of them. And I think they needed to have a perfect pit stop, which they didn't.
Yeah, and I think they said on commentary, didn't they? They said it very much looked like, so the McLaren pit crew came out, the Red Bull pit crew came out, and they said it was almost like Red Bull went, right, whatever they do, we do the opposite. And I kind of understand that logic, but I agree with you. I think if they really wanted to go for the win, they probably could have done with pitting before Ricciardo and rolled the dice a little bit. And as you say, they could have done with a perfect pit stop, and they ended up having an 11-second pit stop, which is hardly ideal. Human error, I think, is what Christian Horner said after the race, but that happens sometimes. Right, I guess we've avoided it long enough now. We should probably talk about Verstappen and Hamilton getting a bit too close for comfort.
He mounted him.
He did, yeah. I mean, my way of putting it was kind of the impartial, politically correct way. But yeah, he did basically just mount Lewis Hamilton's car. Did Max Verstappen? Yeah. So for context, Verstappen pitted, had an 11-second pit stop, which dropped him down the grid a little bit. Hamilton pitted, was it the following lap or was it a couple of laps after?
It was a couple of laps after, because he managed to overtake Norris in that period.
Yes, he did. So it was a couple of laps.
Actually lost it to then after, but yeah.
Yeah, so he pitted a couple of laps after. He also had a slow pit stop, not as slow as Verstappen's, but I think it was about 4 seconds, wasn't it? And they kind of come out. So Hamilton comes out of the pit lane, Verstappen's coming down the straight. They're side by side, roughly going into turn 1, and then going into turn 2, Verstappen's on the inside, Hamilton's on the outside, and then the next thing we knew, they were kind of in the gravel with Verstappen's car resting on Lewis Hamilton's head.
Wow.
And to be honest with you, when I saw this, I was like, oh my goodness, this is literally Senna and Prost. Like, it was scary. Like, when I watch it, I was like, it's like watching it. It's weird. Anyway, sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I've got up document 64. Document 64 of the FIA, I don't know what you'd call this, document management thing. And this is basically a description of what happened and why they've awarded Verstappen a 3 grid place penalty. And the way they've described events was, car 44 was X'd in the pits, car 33 was on the main straight. At the 50-metre board before turn 1, car 44 was significantly ahead of car 33. Car 33 is Verstappen, car 44 is Hamilton, probably should have said that. Car 33 braked late and started to move alongside car 44, although at no point in the sequence does car 33 get any further forward than just behind the front wheel of car 44. So that's how they've described the sequence of the corner.
Okay.
Which, to be fair, I can understand, based on what their description is there, what they are saying, but they are describing turn 1 as the chicane. They are not calling it turn 1 and 2. They are calling turn 1 the chicane. And from that, I can understand what they are saying. They are saying that Hamilton was ahead going into that corner. Verstappen's tried something, hasn't pulled it off, and has mounted him. So because Hamilton was ahead, that's Verstappen's fault. But where I carry issue is that I don't believe the chicane should be considered one turn. I think it should be turn 1 and turn 2. And in my opinion,
it is turn 1 and 2 too.
Well, no, they view that as turn 1, the whole chicane.
I think they're just deeming the right as turn 1. Surely they're deeming that as turn 1, and then turn 2 is when you turn left. Is that not what they're saying? So here we go.
They continued. They said the stewards observed on CCTV footage, that's just the TV cameras, that the driver of car 44 was driving an avoiding line. Although his position caused car 33 to go onto the curb, but further the stewards observed that car 33 was not alongside car 44 until significantly into the entry of turn 1. So, significantly into the entry of turn 1, they are saying Verstappen was alongside significantly into the entry. So they're still saying he was, when basically they were side by side and the mounting started, he was still in the entry of turn 1. So they've considered that whole turn as turn 1.
No, I think they're deeming where Verstappen has perhaps been a bit later on the brakes, going around the outside after Hamilton's come out of the pits. I think that's where they're deeming it turn 1. Is it not?
I don't know.
That's how I would have interpreted that.
The way I've interpreted it is they've considered turn 1 as the entire chicane, which if that is the case, I don't agree with, because I wouldn't agree with that. I think that second turn, I thought Verstappen had a right to remain there. I think they were too far gone from, I know a lot of people are saying he should have done what a lot of other people did and just gone on the slip road thing and swerved and re-entered, but by that point he would have been behind. So I think Verstappen in his head thought, I've got less to lose because Hamilton will drive off. He was quicker than Verstappen on the day. But putting that aside, I think they were too far. I think they'd gone past that point of going off to the left, which is why I didn't think it should have been a penalty afterwards. But that's
my initial thinking was that it was a racing incident. However, having watched it a bit further, there are a couple of things that I would say, if you're going to apportion blame, it would be more Verstappen than Hamilton. Sorry?
I'll agree with you on that.
Because I think the first one was on the coverage afterwards. They were doing like all of the slow-mos, and Paul di Resta said something a little bit similar to what you said, in that basically he got alongside enough to warrant a little bit more give from Hamilton.
Well, because I thought Hamilton did not veer to the right, but gave him room to at least challenge him and then closed it. And I thought, well, if Hamilton had just done the driving line, to be fair, at the same time, Hamilton was coming out of the pits, so he wasn't coming from the left-hand side of the track.
Yeah.
So I guess it was quite awkward.
And
angle.
I guess there may have been an element where Hamilton was thinking, right, well, I've given him enough room into turn 1 now. This is where I'm going to be like, no, this is my corner now. So he probably left him a bit of space just so that he didn't force him off the track. And then he was kind of probably expecting that in turn 2, Verstappen would have pulled out, whether that was going over the curb or dropping in behind Hamilton, whatever that may be. Hamilton possibly may have thought, right, he needs to give way now. But I think Damon Hill then said, if you look at that footage, the gap that there is between the apex of the corner and where Hamilton's car is, you're never going to fit a car in there, which I would agree with.
Mm-hmm.
I think what didn't go in Verstappen's favour was and I know it's a different corner, but turn 4? Yeah, turn 4 lap 1. They go into the chicane. They kind of similar sorts of positions, except Verstappen is the car that's slightly ahead. Hamilton takes avoiding action, bumps over the curbs, and they keep racing. And I think Johnny Herbert summed it up the best for me, and he said, sometimes, as a Formula 1 driver, there are battles that you go into, and there are battles that you don't go into. And I think, for me, that was one of those ones that Verstappen perhaps should have used his head a little bit and gone, no, do you know what, I'm not going to challenge that.
I can see why he did it. He thought, I'm losing points.
Possibly, but if you ignore the just purely from that corner, that scenario, I think there's a little bit of, I don't know. I think perhaps if you are going to apportion blame, I think you're probably more likely to apportion it to Verstappen than you would to Hamilton. And I think the outcome of this was that Verstappen has got a 3-place grid penalty for Russia. And I think some people have said that's harsh. I think that's fair. And my reason being that at Silverstone, Hamilton got a 10-second penalty in the race, which is a more significant penalty than a 3-place grid penalty from the start of the grid. Well, yeah, because you think when you're stopping for 10 seconds, all of the other cars are still moving. At least when you've got a 3-place grid.
You think Verstappen could have gained close to 10 seconds on Ricciardo had he been ahead out of turn 1. The seconds doesn't matter as much for the front runners as the grid place where you can be stuck behind them. Think about it logically.
Is there a 10-second gap between first and third on a grid at the start of a race?
Not at the start, no.
No, well, there we are then. It's as simple as that. Verstappen's penalty...
No, that's a minimalist way of looking at that.
How is it minimalist?
Because you can't just say, it's a less than a 10-second gap between first and third on the grid. You look at it on the race, if you don't get past at the beginning, you're stuck behind them and the people ahead just drive off and it's nothing you can do.
But Hamilton, when he had to do that penalty, he had to stop in the pits, so he's losing the time and he's losing position on track behind the cars.
Okay,
so I
let's go Dutch Grand Prix. The gap to the first to second was 20 seconds.
At the end it was, yeah. At the end it was, but at the start of a race, as in Verstappen at the start of the race has still got the opportunity to be immediately behind second and first. Hamilton, when he has to do his 10-second pit stop, has to stop for 10 seconds in the pits. All of the other cars are still going full tilt. And then, when he comes out, he is then behind cars.
He can do that pit when he wants. He can do that when he's got a 10-second lead, so he's still ahead. Whilst if you're 3 grid places behind, instantly you've got to find a way of getting past those 3, in which time the front runners may have gained way more than that, if you even can overtake. Because you couldn't overtake at Monza.
They may have gained time, but I would argue that you're more likely to gain time in the middle of a race than you are from a standing start when the other driver is stopped. So that you've got, at least when you've got it on the grid, you've got Verstappen, say Verstappen qualifies on pole and then he drops down to 4th. The gap is fixed between 4th and 1st, in terms of distance. Whereas when Hamilton's got to do his 10-second gap, okay, I get what you're saying in that he can gain that time back initially and then take the penalty. But when he is stationary, all of the other cars are still moving at full tilt.
I get what you're saying, but I'd say the 10 seconds is less harsh, purely because I understand what you're saying. You can overtake in the first lap if you're quick enough and you get past them, but if you don't, I think from there on out, I mean, assume you don't overtake that turn, and let's say you're 5 laps into a race. Would you rather be 5 laps into a race and then take 10 seconds off your lead, or would you rather be 5 laps into a race and 3 grid places behind? I'd take the 10 seconds off my lead. It's like I think
take the 3
you can
places
build
behind.
up the 10 seconds much quicker than you can to get past those people. I mean, you've seen it in multiple races. If you're stuck behind them, you're stuck behind them.
But I think it depends on the track. I think it depends on the track.
It does depend on the track.
And
but
in
there's
Russia,
very many tracks that favour the 3 grid place penalty.
I mean, I still think that I would argue that I'd rather have a 3-place grid penalty. Well, here we go. Perfect example. Valtteri Bottas started at the back of the grid and ended up 3rd.
I give you that on this circuit. Oh, I get what you mean. Yeah,
it's dependent on circuit. I'm not saying.
Although I will say he did overtake a fair few. Firstly, because there were so many retirements.
Yes,
there were 5.
Did.
And in a sense,
there
he did
are
have
variables.
all of those advantages. Which
there are variables. Don't get me wrong.
This is one of those circuits you can overtake on if.
Yeah. And ultimately,
when you're up with the front runners, it is a lot harder. I mean, he didn't manage to overtake once he got up there, which was the telling thing.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, the bottom line is a penalty is a penalty, so you're never going to have a good penalty, are you? As in, it's always going to hinder. I guess what I'm saying is ultimately is that it was the leanest. I think it's the lightest penalty they can give. I think.
Well, the thing is, that's the thing. I don't think it was worthy of a penalty, personally. I think it was more Verstappen's fault than Hamilton's, but I wouldn't have said... I still think that was a racing incident.
I think it was a racing incident, but then I also thought that the Hamilton-Verstappen one at Silverstone was a racing incident, and they penalised that. So, and then we also had the one at Austria, where...
I couldn't stand the Austria ones.
Yeah, they had Norris. I think it was Norris and Perez where they just kept penalising. So, I mean, ultimately, they're being consistent, aren't they? So, that's kind of where I'm at. As long as they're consistent, you can't really ask for much more than that. I would say either it's a racing incident or, depending on your view, I don't know. See, I keep flicking between the two because there's a part of me that thinks, it's racing and you don't always have to penalise when two cars go off. However, there is a part of me that thinks Verstappen is quite quick to say, "Oh, you didn't give me any space," but then at lap 1, turn 4, he literally does the same thing that Hamilton did to him, and Hamilton has to take evasive action. So there's a part of me that thinks that it's like,
I would say the difference, though, at that turn was the manner in it happened, in a sense. Verstappen was the car on the outside going into turn 1, and he was coming across the turn, in a sense, so the person on the inside didn't have anywhere to go, whilst at turn 4, Verstappen was the inside, so in a sense, the car on the outside at least, had an alternative. He could be squeezed, but there was definitely something to do about it. That was what I was sort of,
But do you not just think there's an element that... So what you're saying is that for the first lap incident, Verstappen was on the left, Hamilton was on the right, but then the chicane is left-right. And then it just flipped for the first one, which is right-left.
Well, no, because what I'm saying is,
not...
Verstappen, I'd say he was more ahead, but if he was the car that was ahead, at least, towards it. But he was the car on the inside. So he was dictating the line, and he was the inside. So in a sense, if there's no room for Hamilton, he could at least go behind or go off. Whilst for Verstappen, because he was on the inside of that one where it was Hamilton coming, who was the sort of car that was more ahead at the start of it. In a sense, there was nowhere really for him to go.
But at what point are you deeming inside? Because if you think of turn 1, if Hamilton's on the right of the track, then technically going into turn 1, he is on the inside. And at that point, before you reach turn 2, that's where Verstappen should give up, not when you're going into turn 2. Do you get what I mean? As in, like, if you think about turn 4, you had Verstappen on the left-hand side of the track, drifting across to the right before reaching turn 5, which is the exit of the chicane. Hamilton probably would have done the same. Turn 1, he was on the right-hand side, drifting to the left, but Verstappen kept his car there. So what really should have happened, I think, is Verstappen should have gone over the sausage curb to the left before they reached turn 2, which is what Hamilton did on the first lap.
Okay. Maybe.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. Is it? And this is why there's a part of me that thinks. Let me put it this way. I think had we not had that incident, it wasn't an incident. Had we not had that on turn 4, lap 1, where Verstappen pretty much did the exact same thing that Hamilton did, I would possibly go, it's a racing incident. But I do think there are times where somebody said to me the other day, and it did make me chuckle, and they said, Verstappen sometimes, it's almost like he shoots somebody in the face and then blames them for being in the way of the bullet. And there is a bit of part of me that's like, yeah, I kind of see that, as in sometimes he's quick to say, he's got to give me space, we've got to work together, but then he goes and does the exact same that Hamilton did, the exact same thing that Hamilton did on turn 1 lap, whatever it was. So I think it's I would say race. If there's like a scale of Hamilton's fault, Verstappen's fault, and then in the middle you've got racing incident, I would say I'm kind of just over halfway towards Verstappen between racing incident and Verstappen, if that makes sense.
I can see what you mean, because in a sense, Verstappen's the person who can avoid the contact, in a sense. He
Yes.
could have decided to go off a little earlier. But
Like Hamilton did.
like he did, I still follow the narrative that for turn 4 lap 1, Verstappen was on the inside. There was never a danger of a crash there. Just because of the positions of the car.
If you say that, if Hamilton had left his car there, then there is.
Because of the turn
but he
after.
didn't. Well, yeah, because that's.
I don't agree with that one as
on...
much, because the distance between the two turns was so much greater. Like, in a sense, for the first one, it's a chicane, bang bang. There's no drive in between.
But,
whilst for lap 1, turn 4, that's got a length, quite a significant length, where it was like, well, it's a new turn at that point.
But if you think about turn 4, if Hamilton leaves his car basically on the curb, which is where Verstappen was going into turn 1, I think they would crash if Hamilton doesn't take avoiding action.
They would crash if he left his car on the curb, but I think in that scenario, had they crashed, I think everyone would say that was Hamilton's fault, because in that scenario, it would look foolish to stay on the curb. Like,
and I would think it was the same for lap 1.
Verstappen drove.
Turn 1.
Verstappen drove and, in a sense, closed the gap, said, no, we're not allowing Hamilton around there. And I don't think he did that in an unsafe manner. Whilst I feel at turn 1, whatever lap it was, on that scenario, it wasn't really Hamilton driving to block Verstappen, or, in a sense, drive him off the track, in a sense, to stop him from overtaking. I think he left him room and then squeezed him, with no alternative way for him to go.
Yeah, but if you say that, you could argue that what you're saying there is that if Hamilton had been more aggressive and just cut the gap up completely...
Not cut the gap up,
then
he left him room, in a sense, then squeezed.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. But but what you're saying is that if he had left him no room at all, that would have been better than what Hamilton did. Which I'm not sure is the case, because then you are literally cutting him up.
He's not cutting him up, because he was ahead. He was heading to turn 1.
Yeah.
Then at turn 2, he decided to deviate from his line, almost giving Verstappen the room, and then decided again to cut him back off. I think you got to stick to a line. You can't go in and then go out, then go back in again. It's like it's one or the other. Whilst at turn 4, lap 1, Verstappen was like, "I'm taking the inside," and that was the end of it.
Yeah, but you're saying I'm taking the inside, and that's the end of it. If Hamilton had left his car there would have been a crash.
No, because he wasn't on the inside. He was on the outside of that turn. There was no way. There was no way Hamilton was going to keep with him through that turn to the next turn.
But then this is where you're differentiating, because what you're saying is that the point where Hamilton is pushed out at turn 4 is different from the point where Verstappen should have pulled out at turn 1. And I don't think it is, because ultimately, when you look at... Ultimately, they're both chicanes. Hamilton pulled out before the second turn in the chicane. Verstappen didn't pull out before the second turn in the chicane.
I don't think turn 4 is that much... It's a different type of chicane, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, but it's still a chicane.
No. It's a different type of chicane. And the reason I'm saying that is that the turn 1 one is, in a sense, once you've gone in, you're straight onto the next one. Whilst the turn 4 one, it's... there's about 30 metres between those two. I don't know how many metres, I haven't seen it in the flesh, but there's a much more significant gap between. So had he been there, they'd have almost been driving a very short straight to the next turn. I wouldn't call that one a chicane as much as this one. They're two different types of chicanes. The first one cuts back on itself, the second one doesn't. There's a significant gap between those two where I don't think... You can't hang it on the inside through that one and be justified as much as you could for this turn, in my opinion.
I'm not sure you can say that you can hang your car there and not expect something to happen unless somebody is giving you a significant amount of space.
Well,
turn 1 and turn 2.
Going back to document 64, to be honest, I misread, and it does actually say that they separated the two turns, but it's where they've separated them is probably more where my issue is. But they said, during the hearing, the driver of car 33 asserted that the cause of the incident was driver of the car 44 opening the steering after turn 1 and squeezing him into the apex of turn 2. So there, car 33 assumes that he opened the steering to allow him in. And then driver of car 44 said that car 33 attempted to pass very late and should have given up the corner by backing off sooner. So I think in that scenario, I think, saying that, we go even further on. In the opinion of the stewards, the manoeuvre was attempted too late for car 33 to have the right to racing room. So it's a tough one there, but both.
Oh, of course it is. It is a tough one.
Both the FIA and Verstappen thought that Hamilton left him some room, but they were saying that Verstappen went into that room too late. So, yeah.
I mean, I get what you're saying, but there's a part of me that thinks that the alternative is either that he just lets him through, which Lewis Hamilton is never going to do, nor would any other Formula 1 driver, or he leaves him no room in which you're almost guaranteed to crash anyway. So
I don't know why he went wide though, out of the turn.
Well, Hamilton.
I know he was taking an awkward line because he was coming out of the pits, so he couldn't go to the left hand side of the track to start his entry. But in a sense, he had the inside line at turn 1, and he could have just stayed on the inside into turn 2. But it was almost like he gave a bit of room and then decided to come in later on. I don't know why he gave the room.
He probably tried to squeeze him, as in, because ultimately, if he just darts across to the left, Verstappen's going to rear end him, and that would be Hamilton's fault. If he just sticks to because of the nature of the chicane, if you stick to the right hand side, I'm not sure you'd get good enough drive to.
No, I don't either. But I don't know why he went to the right hand side. Because the way he was in the first turn, I thought he could just stay on the inside, and you can get inside of both in theory.
Yeah. Anyway, I feel like we could debate this for. Well, there's a reason why people are still talking about it, and we're Thursday of the after the race, so we could probably go on about it for ages. But ultimately, they both ended up out of the race, and I think out of the two drivers, the driver that'll probably be happier would probably be Verstappen, given that you'd have had Monza as a Mercedes track.
You know what? I think.
But on to the next one, I guess.
I think Verstappen would take the crash and a 3 grid place penalty over letting Hamilton go away from him there.
Possibly.
Points are everything. It's like the old adage in football. Do you take them? I always think about this. I thought about it in the Champions League final when Chelsea played City, and when Havertz was through, I thought, do you take down the man, take the red card, but stop the goal? And if they had, they would have. You know what I mean? They potentially it would be 0-0 still, and who knows how it could have ended up. But I think you always stop the points first and foremost. It's a points game. You can make up the other ones.
So what you're saying is that Verstappen did it on purpose?
No, I genuinely.
No, I'm joking.
I wouldn't say he didn't.
Ooh. Do it on purpose?
Yeah. I think he could have gone off, but he thought it means more to Hamilton than me if this crash happens, and I'll take a crash.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, moving on from Verstappen and Hamilton. So yeah, the race finished. Danny Rick in first, Lando Norris second, Bottas third. Which, just saying, a third place finish for Bottas is insane considering he was at the back of the grid.
I did feel quite bad.
I know he had
Perez,
the new engine and stuff,
because that was a 5-second penalty for an instant where the FIA could have said give the position back. it was. I think he was in the wrong. He didn't tell.
It was a pretty significant corner cut, as in he should have known that he needs to give that back.
Yeah.
It was massive. It was like something that we would do when we're playing F1 2020 against each other.
That's true. But yeah, they didn't say there and then. If it was that obvious that they were going to give a 5-second, I thought maybe a 3.
Yeah, they should have.
3 would have been a more sporting penalty to give, but hey ho.
Yeah. It's been a long time since McLaren had won a race. They hadn't won one since Lewis Hamilton was racing for them, and that's been a long time.
Last win was 2012.
2012, was it?
Last 1-2 was 2010. It was Ricciardo's 8th win, but his first since 2018. I can't remember what race, though. So, yeah.
Monaco.
Was it? Fair play. It was
Monaco was his last win. Oh, yeah, Danny Rick. Yeah, he's Mr. Well, I was about to say he's Mr. Monaco, apart from this season where he had an absolute stinker.
True.
But yeah, it was nice to see. It was nice to see McLaren at the front. I don't know. I feel there's a little bit of me that's hoping that when the regulation changes come in, that teams like McLaren, less so Ferrari, because I feel like they've been a little bit of they've suffered from their own stupidity a little bit, I think. There's a part of me that's like, I would really like McLaren to be back in the hunt a little bit. Yeah. Does that bring us to the end of the podcast?
It does. I think it does.
It does bring us to the end of the podcast. Well, thank you all for listening. I think we've got a week break in the Formula 1 now. We've got a week off and then Russia.
Yeah, I don't think they'll do a quadruple header.
No, they wouldn't do a quadruple header, you're right. And to be fair, you would have gone from being like in Central Europe, in Belgium, the Netherlands and Italy, all the way to Russia.
Well,
Like,
to be fair,
can you
I
imagine?
think the distance between the Netherlands and Italy is that
Yeah,
greater
maybe.
No, this probably would have been. But to be fair, they've done more significant jumps. But yeah,
Yeah, they have. That's true. But in a quadruple header, that would be
it
epic.
would. A bit much.
But yeah, so Russia's the next race. I'm not sure what we'll be doing in between because we've got a bit of football going, haven't we?
We have.
We've also got the NFL started back this weekend.
That's a good point. Forgot about that.
And there was some good games there. But yeah, as always, we're on. Well, I say as always. It's been a long time since I've done this bit. Right, as always, we are on YouTube and Spotify. So if this is on one of those, why not follow or subscribe? Based on the platform you're listening on. We're on Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, Anchor, Pocket Casts. I think I've done them all. I think so. There's enough to be getting on with there. Jack, pleasure as always.
Gracias.
And we shall speak to you all soon.